So Games Workshop makes these little plastic mausoleums, which come as part of its Sigmarite Mausoleum terrain kit. It's probably one of the better value kits that Games Workshop offers. The terrain pieces are pretty nice. You get 6 mausoleums, some fences, and a couple of little statues, but it's still, $100. So I thought, why not make some of my own, using the measurements from these very same mausoleums? Let's do that. Hello everyone, I am Destro and this is Realm of the Lich King. In this episode I'm going to be building a couple of mausoleums. So the first step was measuring out the mausoleums to find out what dimensions I would need to cut my piece of foam board in. Then just mark that off with a pencil and cut it out with my hobby knife. I decided to do one of the larger mausoleums and one smaller one in order to get a good comparison going. This is the majority of the early process, just cutting out these pieces. You gotta be sure to be careful with your hobby knife. Foam board will tear if the knife is not sharp enough when you go through it. For the front pieces, I needed to mark off the middle section, draw a little cross, and then go from one part of that cross to the top in order to establish where the roof would be. It's mostly just made it even on both sides. Once again, this process of cutting and measuring is easily the most time-consuming part of the build, but it is so important to get these things even on both sides and accurate and looking good that it's not worth cutting corners. Once everything was cut out, I cut another couple of pieces, just a little bit larger than the footprint of the mausoleums themselves, to use as a base. The Sigmarite Mausoleum kits come with plastic molded bases, but for mine I just used foam board with a bit of cardboard cladding around the edges. You can see some remnants of hot glue on this one from when I initially tried to stick it down in the wrong direction. Fixed that and got it glued on correctly, and now we have two little sort of standard mausoleum shapes ready to go. For the roof, I used graphics medium chipboard, scored thinly down the middle, not cut all the way through, and then stuck a couple of popsicle sticks, craft sticks, in the middle there just to provide some extra support. Hot glued those on, and decorated them with some extra strips of chipboard. Both sides. There we go. This did leave a bit of a gap along the top of the roof, where the chipboard had been scored, so I glued down some hollow plasticard rod, and stuck a couple of those craft pearls onto the end of it to cover up the gaps and just provide a little bit of extra detail. I did get a box of craft pearls in a multitude of sizes, and one of them just happened to be about perfect for this. Then some more cardboard cladding along the sides to cover up the edges of the foam board. Being careful not to burn your fingers on the hot glue. And I cut out a few pieces of sprue. It was kind of difficult to find pieces of sprue long enough. You can see that middle one still has a gap at the top, and I'll cover that up with a bit later. But once you've got some pieces of sprue that are, about the right size, add some nice extra detail. I cut up a few more of those craft sticks to add some detail to the end of this one. One long one and a couple of smaller ones on either side. This mostly just breaks up the flat space of the back. And I used a few more craft pearls. Once again, just add a little more visual interest to them. I think it worked out okay. The main thing is that you don't want to have a big flat space. You also don't want to touch these darn things before the superglue has finished curing, or you'll knock them out of position and need to fix it. So here I am cutting out some pieces to use as front doors for the larger mausoleum. I wanted a double-layered effect, kind of one larger back piece and then a smaller front piece, but this did necessitate cutting out a middle piece from both of them, and it was a bit of a pain. Making nice smooth cuts on the interior of a piece of chipboard is not easy without tearing or bending it. Once they were cut out and in place though, looks pretty good. Still needs something though. What can I do about filling that in? Well, toothpicks and copper wire. Wrap a bit of copper wire around a toothpick, dot a super glue to hold it in place, and then just twist that copper wire and add dots of super glue as needed until you have enough toothpicks to fill in your space. Put those in place with hot glue, and there we are. Doesn't quite match the ones on the front of GW's kits, but it's close. I used the offcuts from that to provide some detail for the back of the smaller mausoleum. This is why you save your offcuts. And then I did some more cladding with bits cut out of it to provide more detail on the small one. Ended up making one as a template and then just using that to measure out and cut the other one. Easy enough to get those hot glued in place. But using chipboard for this meant that it sat relatively flush with the roof, and I needed to figure out what to do about that. Did get to use the offcuts as decoration on the larger mausoleum though. Save your offcuts, people. Ended up deciding to use another couple of pieces of little plastic rod as a sort of, not quite a gutter, but a little bit of edging for that roof. The door for the smaller mausoleum got made out of chipboard. I wasn't as happy with the shape of this one and how there's gaps and things in it, but it looks okay. Raided my bits box for a few little bits. Found some interesting ones. I think these are mostly old Dark Angel upgrade pieces. They work really, really well as graveyard decorations. And the plastic rod meant that I was able to fix them on with plastic glue. A couple of little, I think these are from Terminators, onto the sides, again fixed in place with plastic glue, and then the one on the front I was only able to use hot glue to fit in place. With that done, it was time for painting. The roof I wanted to look like it was aged and heavily verdigrised, and so I decided to do a base coat of turquoise. For the main color of the stone, I wanted something that would stand out and be a little bit unusual and distinct from the way I did the bases. So we're going with overall cool colors for this build. The bases got picked out in regular gray to make them stand out from the buildings. I ended up needing about 3 different colors of gray on this piece. With the base coats done, a couple of quick dry brushes helped seal in some detail. Dry brushing works great over chipboard, not as well on the foam board. And you can see it gets a little bit streaky on the basic smooth plastic, but yeah, you know, still works well enough. We're going to put a wash over this later to unify it, anyways. The verdigrised roofs did still need to have a little bit of a metallic sheen to them, so, you know, another dry brush does well enough. You don't want to cover up too much of the turquoise. This does end up looking a bit funny before I've put on the final wash, but you get the idea. With terrain pieces like this, you often don't need to do a super excellent paint job or anything. On the table, the focus of the game is always going to be the miniatures, and you don't really want your terrain to outshine them. Decided to go with purple for the stone of the mausoleums. If you're up on the lore in Age of Sigmar or Warhammer Fantasy, this actually turns out to make a whole bunch of sense. Purple is the color of Shyish, the Wind of Death, and the Amethyst Order of Wizards, so purple mausoleums make perfect sense. The wash over the bases ended up obscuring a lot of the dry brush. I think maybe I would go back and do another light dry brush just to pick out the edges, but as a quick paint job for this, works fine. Again, terrain doesn't need to be perfect. It should look good, but you can make it look good with just a quick bit of effort. Speaking of, I needed to make my own verdigris glaze for the roof. Yeah, VALLEJO model color produces one called verdigris glaze, but it's really more of a paint. I had to add a whole bunch of medium and thinner and stuff to get it proper. The fences and gates and things I wanted to look old and dull, not vibrant. I didn't want them to look exactly out of repair, but I did want them to appear aged, and one of the things that iron does as it ages is rust. A few little random splotches here and there end up adding quite a lot of character to these old gates, I think. Then once again, contrast paints showing their usefulness here. A quick base coat, single coat of contrast, and that's good enough for a piece of terrain. I do a little bit of highlighting if these were miniatures, but for a base, perfectly fine. Same deal with this gold. I like the color of Vallejo's old gold a lot, but I didn't need to highlight it at all on this terrain piece. Sure, you could, and it would add a bit of visual interest, but for a couple extra accents, it works fine on its own. These were probably the detail I ended up spending the most time on, these little roses. Once again, I went with purple because I felt that would fit the Realm of Shyish, the Wind of Death, and the Amethyst Order, but I did decide to highlight them quite starkly. These are something that will stand out quite well on the finished piece because of these extra highlights. And having these all highlighted doesn't look great when you're just starting, but once they're all done, oh yeah. Moreover, having one detail that has clearly had a little bit of extra care and attention paid to it in the painting process really elevates the whole piece overall. It's a good way to give your terrain a little bit more style without all that much extra effort. So, how did I do? I ended up painting up 2 of Games Workshop's Mausoleums and 2 of my own. And you can see that GWs are a lot more detailed and probably nicer looking overall, but they also cost an order of something like 8 times as much. A few bits and a couple of dollars worth of foam board and you'll have a piece of terrain that looks great on the tabletop without breaking the bank. And with that, that brings us to the end of the video. If you're still here, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Please leave a comment on the video if you think I did well or if you think I did bad. Maybe tell me what you would have done different. Either way, I hope to see you again next time.